Marcus Rodriguez had always been different from other soldiers. At 28 years old, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world. His dark eyes held a determination that his fellow Marines in the 3rd Battalion had come to respect and fear in equal measure. Born in a small town in Texas, Marcus grew up knowing what it meant to fight for what mattered. His father had been a Vietnam veteran who never spoke much about the war, but Marcus could see the shadows in his eyes during quiet moments. The deployment to Afghanistan in 2011 was Marcus's 3rd tour. He had already served 2 tours in Iraq, earning himself a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his actions during the Battle of Fallujah. But Afghanistan was different. The terrain was harsher, the enemy more elusive, and the stakes somehow felt higher. Marcus served as a squad leader in Bravo Company, responsible for 12 Marines who looked up to him like a big brother. The valley of Kunar province had become their temporary home for the past 6 months. The forward operating base sat nestled between towering mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Every morning, Marcus would wake up before dawn and walk the perimeter, checking on his men, making sure everyone was ready for whatever the day might bring. He had developed a reputation for being everywhere at once, appearing at the most dangerous moments to pull his Marines out of trouble. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the company's intelligence officer, had noticed Marcus's unusual dedication. She often watched him during briefings, seeing how he absorbed every detail about their missions, asking questions that other squad leaders might miss. Marcus had an ability to read the battlefield like others read books. He could sense danger before it appeared, feel the rhythm of combat like music only he could hear. The mission that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning in October. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces, was hiding in a small village called De Bala, approximately 15 kilometers from their base. The village sat at the bottom of a narrow valley, surrounded by steep rocky walls that created natural choke points. Marcus studied the mission briefings with his usual intensity. Something felt wrong about the entire operation. The intelligence seemed too clean, too convenient. The Taliban commander had been clever enough to avoid capture for over 2 years, yet suddenly they had his exact location and routine. Marcus shared his concerns with Lieutenant Chen during the pre-mission briefing. "Ma'am, this feels like a setup," Marcus said, pointing at the satellite images spread across the table. "Look at these approach routes. There are only 3 ways into that valley, and all of them create perfect kill zones. If the enemy knows we're coming, we'll be sitting ducks." Lieutenant Chen appreciated Marcus's tactical mind, but orders were orders. Higher command had deemed the mission critical, and they had received assurance that the intelligence was solid. "I understand your concerns, Rodriguez, but we have our orders. Your squad will provide overwatch from the northern ridge while Alpha and Charlie squads clear the village. Stay sharp up there." The night before the mission, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through the base, checking and double-checking equipment, talking quietly with his Marines. Private First Class James Murphy, a 19-year-old from Boston, was nervous about his first major operation. Marcus sat with him for an hour, sharing stories and calming his nerves. "Listen, Murphy," Marcus said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Fear is normal. It keeps you alive. But don't let it control you. Stay focused on your training, watch out for your brothers, and remember that we all go home together." Sergeant David Kim, Marcus's second-in-command, had served with him for over 2 years. Kim understood Marcus's instincts better than anyone and shared his concerns about the mission. "Something's not right about this one, Rodriguez. My gut says we're walking into trouble." Marcus nodded, feeling the same unease. "Keep your eyes open tomorrow, Kim. If things go sideways, get the men out. Don't worry about me." The morning of October 15th arrived with a crystal-clear sky and temperatures already climbing toward what promised to be a hot day. Marcus gathered his squad for final equipment checks. Each Marine carried extra ammunition, medical supplies, and water for what was expected to be a 6-hour operation. Marcus had added additional explosives to his pack, along with a satellite phone and extra batteries for their radios. The helicopter ride to the insertion point took 30 minutes, flying low through mountain valleys to avoid potential enemy radar. Marcus watched the terrain below, memorizing landmarks and identifying potential escape routes. His squad of 12 Marines was tight-knit and experienced. Besides Sergeant Kim and Private Murphy, there was Corporal Jenkins, the squad's designated marksman, Lance Corporal Washington, their communications specialist, and 8 other Marines who had proven themselves in combat. They inserted at dawn on a ridge overlooking the target village. Marcus immediately established overwatch positions, with his Marines spread across a 200-meter line that provided clear views of all approaches to Debala. The village appeared peaceful in the early morning light, with smoke rising from cooking fires and children playing in the dusty streets. For 3 hours, they watched as Alpha and Charlie squads made their approach through the valley below. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. The squads reached the village outskirts without incident and began their systematic clearing operations. Marcus maintained constant radio contact with the operation commander, providing updates on what he could observe from his elevated position. Then everything changed in an instant. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously. Hidden enemy positions that had been invisible from the air opened fire with heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. Marcus watched in horror as the valley floor erupted in explosions and gunfire. Alpha and Charlie squads were caught in a carefully planned ambush that had been months in the making. "Contact! Contact!" Marcus shouted into his radio. "Alpha and Charlie are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. We have wounded down there." Without hesitation, Marcus began directing his squad's fire onto enemy positions he could identify from his vantage point. Corporal Jenkins, with his precision rifle, began eliminating enemy machine gun teams with surgical accuracy. But the enemy had planned for this contingency as well. Suddenly, Marcus heard the distinctive whistle of incoming mortars. His years of combat experience kicked in instantly. "Incoming! Take cover!" he screamed. But even as he dove for protection, he knew they were in serious trouble. The first mortar round landed 50 meters from their position, showering them with rocks and dirt. The second landed closer. Marcus realized that the enemy had pre-planned firing positions targeting their overwatch location. Somehow, the Taliban had known exactly where the Marines would position themselves. "Kim, we need to move!" Marcus shouted over the explosions. "They've got our range." As his squad began bounding movements to new positions, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He saw that Alpha Squad was pinned down in the village, taking casualties they couldn't afford. Their radio calls for help were becoming increasingly desperate. Someone needed to create a diversion, and Marcus knew exactly what had to be done. "Kim, take command," Marcus ordered, grabbing extra ammunition and grenades. "Get the squad to the alternate position we discussed. I'm going down there." "Rodriguez, that's suicide!" Sergeant Kim protested. "You can't take on an entire Taliban position by yourself." But Marcus was already moving. His plan was simple and desperate. Create enough chaos and draw enough enemy fire to give Alpha and Charlie squads a chance to extract their wounded and reach safety. He knew the odds were against him, but that had never stopped Marcus before. Moving down the steep mountainside with surprising speed, Marcus used every bit of cover available. Rocks, sparse vegetation, and small depressions in the ground provided concealment as he made his way toward the enemy positions that were devastating his fellow Marines below. His first target was a machine gun nest positioned on a small hill overlooking the village. Marcus approached from an angle that the enemy hadn't anticipated, using dead ground to mask his movement. When he was within grenade range, he pulled the pin on 2 grenades simultaneously and hurled them with deadly accuracy. The explosion silenced the machine gun and created exactly the diversion he had hoped for. Enemy fighters began repositioning to deal with this new threat, reducing the pressure on the trapped Marines in the village. Marcus immediately moved to his next target, a mortar position that had been causing havoc among the coalition forces. For 20 minutes, Marcus conducted a one-man assault against superior numbers. He moved like a ghost through the battlefield, appearing where the enemy least expected him, striking hard, and then disappearing again. His actions allowed Alpha Squad to extract their wounded and begin fighting their way toward the extraction point. But the enemy was adapting to his tactics. As Marcus approached what he thought was an abandoned building to use as cover, he realized too late that it was a trap. Taliban fighters had anticipated his route and prepared an ambush specifically for him. The explosion came from multiple directions at once. Rocket-propelled grenades and concentrated small arms fire converged on his position. Marcus felt the building collapse around him as massive stone blocks, some weighing hundreds of pounds, crashed down from the ceiling and walls. In the chaos and dust, Marcus felt crushing weight pin his legs and lower body. Sharp pain shot through his left arm, and he could taste blood in his mouth. As the dust began to settle, he realized he was trapped under tons of rubble, buried alive in what had once been a Taliban safe house. The silence that followed the explosion was deafening. Marcus could hear his own breathing and heartbeat, but nothing else. He tried to move, but quickly discovered that several large stones had pinned him in place. His legs were completely trapped, and he could barely move his upper body. Marcus activated his emergency beacon and tried to reach his radio, but it had been damaged in the collapse. He was alone, buried and wounded, with no way to communicate his position to friendly forces. As he lay in the darkness, Marcus began to assess his situation with the calm professionalism that had carried him through 3 combat deployments. His water supply was limited to what remained in his damaged hydration system. He had some field rations, but access was limited by his pinned position. Most critically, he could feel blood loss from several wounds, though none seemed immediately life-threatening if he could control the bleeding. Marcus had always been a fighter, but this was unlike anything he had faced before. This wasn't a battle he could win through superior tactics or determination. This was a test of pure survival, and he was going to need every ounce of strength and willpower he possessed. As night fell on his first day trapped under the rubble, Marcus began what would become a legendary test of human endurance. He rationed his water carefully, applied pressure to his wounds using torn pieces of his uniform, and began the mental battle that would be just as important as the physical one. He thought about his Marines, hoping they had made it safely back to base. He thought about his family back in Texas, his younger sister who was starting college, his mother who worried about him constantly. Most of all, he thought about the promise he had made to himself and his men, that they would all go home together. Marcus Rodriguez didn't know it yet, but his incredible ordeal was just beginning. Buried under dust and blood, he was about to discover just how indestructible the human spirit could be. Day 2 under the rubble began with Marcus fighting off hypothermia. The Afghan nights were brutally cold, even in October, and his trapped position made it impossible to generate body heat through movement. He had managed to tear strips from his uniform to create makeshift bandages for his wounds, but blood loss continued to weaken him gradually. Marcus established a routine that would keep him sane and focused. Every hour he performed mental exercises his father had taught him during hunting trips in the Texas wilderness. He recited the names and faces of every Marine in his company, going through their hometowns, their families, their dreams for after the war. This mental discipline helped him stay connected to his purpose, staying alive to see his brothers in arms again. The physical challenges were immense. His legs remained completely pinned under a massive stone beam that had once supported the building's ceiling. Movement was limited to his upper body, and even that caused excruciating pain from his broken ribs and damaged left shoulder. Marcus had to carefully manage his water intake, knowing that rescue might not come for days or even weeks. By day 3, Marcus began hearing sounds from above, footsteps, voices speaking in what sounded like Pashto, the local Taliban dialect. His heart raced as he realized enemy fighters were moving through the ruins above him, probably searching for his body or any useful equipment. Marcus forced himself to remain absolutely silent, even when shifting rubble caused sharp stones to dig into his flesh. The psychological warfare was perhaps worse than the physical pain. Marcus's mind began playing tricks on him, creating sounds and voices that weren't really there. He would think he heard helicopters approaching, only to realize it was the wind whistling through gaps in the rubble. Sometimes he thought he heard his Marines calling his name, and he had to physically restrain himself from calling back, knowing it might give away his position to enemy forces. On day 4, Marcus made a critical discovery. While carefully exploring the small space around his trapped position, his fingers found a pocket of air that led to a small cavity in the collapsed structure. The space was barely large enough for his hand, but it represented something precious, a connection to the outside world. More importantly, it provided slightly better ventilation, which could mean the difference between life and death in his confined space. Marcus used his combat knife to carefully widen the opening, working slowly to avoid causing further collapse. The work was exhausting in his weakened condition, but he persisted with the methodical determination that had made him an exceptional Marine. After hours of careful effort, he had created an opening large enough to push his hand through and wave a small piece of his uniform as a potential signal flag. The hunger was becoming a serious problem. Marcus had been surviving on the few energy bars and field rations he could reach, but his supplies were running dangerously low. More concerning was his water situation. His hydration system had been damaged in the collapse, and he was down to perhaps a day's worth of water if he rationed carefully. Marcus began to understand that rescue might not come from conventional search and rescue operations. His unit would have reported him missing in action, but in the chaos of the ambush, they might not have an accurate fix on his exact location. The Taliban controlled the immediate area around the collapsed building, making it dangerous for coalition forces to conduct extended search operations. On day 5, Marcus experienced his lowest moment. Delirium from dehydration and blood loss made it difficult to distinguish between reality and hallucination. He found himself having conversations with his deceased father, seeing his sister playing in their childhood backyard, feeling his mother's hand on his forehead like when he had fevers as a child. Part of him wanted to give up, to simply close his eyes and let the peace take him. But something deep inside Marcus refused to surrender. Maybe it was his Marine training, maybe it was the promise he had made to his men, or maybe it was just the stubborn Texas spirit that his family was known for. Whatever it was, Marcus forced himself to stay conscious, to keep fighting, to keep believing that somehow he would survive this impossible situation. That evening, as Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, he heard something that made him think he was hallucinating again. The sound was faint but distinctive. Helicopter rotors in the distance. Marcus had heard enough helicopters during his 3 deployments to distinguish between different types, and this sounded like the heavy thrum of military aircraft rather than the higher-pitched whine of civilian helicopters. Marcus carefully pushed his makeshift signal flag through the opening he had created and began moving it back and forth. He knew the chances of anyone seeing such a small signal were practically zero, but he had to try. Hope was all he had left, and he was going to fight for it with everything he had. Unknown to Marcus, his disappearance had triggered something unprecedented. His commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, had refused to write him off as killed in action, despite the obvious impossibility of surviving the building collapse. Colonel Harrison had served with Marcus's father in Vietnam and felt a personal obligation to find the missing Marine. More importantly, Marcus's extraordinary actions during the ambush had been observed by a forward air controller who had been circling overhead in a reconnaissance aircraft. The controller had documented Marcus's lone assault on multiple enemy positions, his successful diversion that allowed Alpha and Charlie squads to extract their wounded, and the approximate location where he had been last seen before the building collapse. This intelligence had reached the attention of SEAL Team 6, which was operating in the region as part of a classified mission targeting high-value Taliban leadership. Commander Michael "Shark" Patterson, a 20-year Special Operations veteran, had read the reports about Marcus's actions with professional admiration. Patterson understood what kind of courage it took to conduct a solo assault against overwhelming odds to save fellow Marines. When SEAL Team 6 completed their primary mission 3 days ahead of schedule, Commander Patterson made an unofficial decision that would change Marcus's fate. Instead of returning directly to base, Patterson convinced his team to conduct what he called a reconnaissance in force of the area where Marcus had been lost. Officially, they were gathering intelligence on enemy movement patterns. Unofficially, they were looking for a Marine who might still be alive. The SEAL team consisted of 8 operators, each with multiple combat deployments and specialized skills. Besides Commander Patterson, there was Chief Petty Officer Rick "Ghost" Morrison, the team's explosives expert, Petty Officer First Class Tony "Hawk" Valdez, their communications specialist, and 5 other operators whose reputation for finding and rescuing personnel was legendary throughout the special operations community. On day 6 of Marcus's ordeal, the SEAL team began their methodical search of the ambush site. They moved through the area during nighttime hours, using night vision equipment and thermal imaging to avoid Taliban patrols that regularly swept through the region. The collapsed building where Marcus was trapped looked like dozens of other destroyed structures in the valley, but something about it caught Chief Morrison's attention. Morrison was examining the rubble pattern when he noticed something unusual. The collapse appeared to have created internal voids rather than completely crushing the structure. His experience with explosives told him that the building had been brought down by external detonations rather than structural failure, which meant there might be survival spaces within the debris. As the SEAL team carefully approached the collapsed building, Petty Officer Valdez picked up a faint signal on his radio equipment. It was barely detectable, more of an electronic whisper than an actual transmission, but it was definitely coming from somewhere beneath the rubble. Valdez immediately recognized it as the signature of a military emergency beacon. Commander Patterson made the decision to investigate further, despite the obvious dangers. The team established a security perimeter, while Morrison and Valdez began using specialized listening equipment to triangulate the source of the beacon. After 2 hours of careful work, they had identified a section of the collapse where the signal was strongest. Marcus, now delirious from dehydration and approaching his physical limits, became aware of sounds from above that were different from the Taliban patrols he had been hearing. These sounds were more methodical, more purposeful, and they seemed to be concentrating on the area directly above his position. With tremendous effort, Marcus managed to tap on a piece of metal debris with his combat knife, creating a rhythmic pattern that any trained military personnel would recognize as a signal. 3 short taps, 3 long taps, 3 short taps, SOS in Morse code. He repeated the pattern every few minutes, praying that someone friendly was listening. Chief Morrison heard the tapping immediately and recognized it for what it was. "Commander, we've got someone alive down there," he whispered into his communication headset. "That's definitely a distress signal, and it's coming from right below us." The SEAL team faced a critical decision. Attempting a rescue would require hours of careful excavation work that would expose them to enemy patrols and potential attack. The smart tactical decision would be to mark the location and call for a full rescue operation with heavy equipment and massive security support. But Commander Patterson understood that whoever was trapped below might not survive the additional time that would require. Patterson made a decision that exemplified the SEAL ethos: leave no one behind. "We extract him tonight," he told his team. "Ghost, what do you need to get through this rubble without bringing the whole thing down on top of him?" Morrison began a careful analysis of the collapsed structure, using his explosives expertise to identify which pieces of debris could be safely moved and which ones were providing critical structural support. The work would have to be done by hand, piece by piece, to avoid causing a secondary collapse that would kill whoever was trapped below. Marcus heard the sounds of excavation beginning above him and allowed himself to believe, for the first time in 6 days, that he might actually survive. He began tapping more frequently, trying to guide his potential rescuers toward his exact location. The work seemed to be progressing, but Marcus was aware that his strength was fading rapidly. By dawn, the SEAL team had managed to clear several tons of debris, working in shifts while maintaining security watch for enemy patrols. As the sun began to rise, Commander Patterson knew they were running out of time. Operating in daylight would expose them to enemy observation and potential attack. Morrison made a breakthrough when he moved a large stone slab and suddenly felt air movement from below. "I've got an opening," he whispered excitedly. "Someone down there, can you hear me?" Marcus heard the voice and tried to respond, but his throat was so dry that he could barely make a sound. Instead, he managed to push his hand through the opening he had been working on for days, waving frantically to signal his presence. Petty Officer Valdez saw the hand immediately. "We've got visual contact. There's definitely someone alive down there." The final phase of the rescue required delicate work to widen the opening without causing a collapse. Morrison used small, controlled charges to break up specific pieces of debris, while the rest of the team carefully removed rubble piece by piece. After another 2 hours of painstaking effort, they had created an opening large enough for extraction. Commander Patterson was the first to make visual contact with Marcus. Looking down into the small cavity where the Marine had survived for 6 days, Patterson saw a figure that barely looked human anymore. Marcus was covered in dust and blood, his uniform torn and filthy, his face gaunt from dehydration and blood loss. But his eyes were alert and focused. And Patterson could see the unmistakable determination that had kept Marcus alive through an ordeal that would have killed most people. "Marine, we're United States Navy SEALs, and we're here to get you out," Patterson said, his voice calm and professional despite the emotion he felt at finding someone alive after so long. Marcus looked up at the SEAL commander and managed to whisper the words he had been repeating to himself for 6 days. "Semper Fi, get me home." The extraction itself required another hour of careful work. Marcus's legs were still pinned under debris, and Morrison had to use precision charges to break apart the stone beam that had held him prisoner. When Marcus was finally freed, the damage to his lower body was extensive, but he was alive and conscious. Chief Morrison administered immediate medical care while the rest of the team prepared for extraction. Marcus had lost significant weight, his legs were badly damaged, and he showed signs of severe dehydration and blood loss. But remarkably, his vital signs were stable, and his mental state remained sharp. As the SEAL team prepared to carry Marcus to their extraction point, he grabbed Commander Patterson's arm with surprising strength. "My Marines," he whispered. "Did they make it out?" Patterson looked into Marcus's eyes and saw the same spirit that had driven him to conduct a solo assault against impossible odds. "They made it, Marine. Your actions saved their lives. Alpha and Charlie squads extracted safely thanks to you." For the first time in 6 days, Marcus Rodriguez allowed himself to smile. He had kept his promise. His brothers in arms had made it home, and now, thanks to 8 Navy SEALs who had refused to give up on him, he was going home too. As the helicopter lifted off from the valley floor, carrying Marcus toward medical treatment and safety, the legend of the indestructible Marine who survived 6 days buried under rubble began to spread throughout the Special Operations community. But for Marcus, the most important thing was simpler than legend or fame. He was alive, his Marines were safe, and he was finally going home. The helicopter ride to Bagram Airfield took 37 minutes, but to Marcus Rodriguez, it felt like a journey from death back to life. Chief Petty Officer Morrison worked continuously during the flight, establishing IV lines, monitoring vital signs, and coordinating with the medical team that would be waiting at the base hospital. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time he opened his eyes, he saw the faces of the SEAL team members who had pulled him from his grave. Commander Patterson stayed close to Marcus throughout the flight, occasionally speaking to him in calm, reassuring tones. "Stay with us, Marine. You've made it this far. Don't quit on us now." These words became an anchor for Marcus, something to focus on when the pain threatened to overwhelm him. At Bagram, a full medical team was waiting. Dr. Sarah Kim, a trauma surgeon with extensive combat medicine experience, took immediate charge of Marcus's care. Her initial assessment revealed the full extent of his ordeal: severe dehydration, multiple fractures in both legs, 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and numerous lacerations. Most concerning was the kidney damage from prolonged dehydration and the early signs of infection from his wounds. "This man should not be alive," Dr. Kim told her medical team as they worked to stabilize Marcus. Whatever kept him going for 6 days buried under that rubble wasn't just physical strength. This is pure willpower. The first 48 hours in the hospital were critical. Marcus underwent 2 surgeries to repair the fractures in his legs and to clean and close his infected wounds. His kidneys were functioning, but barely, requiring careful monitoring and fluid management. Throughout this period, Marcus remained conscious and alert, constantly asking about his Marines and insisting that he needed to contact his family. Sergeant Kim, Marcus's second-in-command, was the first member of his squad to visit him in the hospital. Kim had been struggling with guilt since the mission, feeling responsible for not following Marcus when he made his lone assault on the enemy positions. When he walked into Marcus's hospital room and saw his squad leader alive, both men broke down emotionally. "I should have gone with you," Kim said, tears streaming down his face. "I should never have let you go alone." Marcus, despite his weakened condition, grabbed Kim's hand with surprising strength. "You did exactly what I ordered you to do. You got our Marines home safe. That was the mission, and you accomplished it perfectly." The reunion with his squad became an emotional milestone in Marcus's recovery. Over the following days, each of his 12 Marines visited him in the hospital. Private Murphy, the young Marine who had been nervous before the mission, couldn't stop thanking Marcus for saving his life. The entire squad had made it home safely because of Marcus's actions during the ambush. News of Marcus's survival spread rapidly throughout the military community. His story became legendary among the Marines in Afghanistan, but it also reached the highest levels of military leadership. General David Petraeus, then commanding all coalition forces in Afghanistan, personally visited Marcus in the hospital to commend his extraordinary courage and dedication. "What you did out there wasn't just heroic," General Petraeus told Marcus during their meeting. "You exemplified the very best of what it means to be a United States Marine. Your actions saved lives and demonstrated courage that will be remembered long after this war is over." The psychological recovery proved to be just as challenging as the physical healing. Marcus began experiencing nightmares about being trapped under the rubble, along with survivor's guilt about being rescued when other Marines had been killed in action during the war. Captain Maria Santos, a military psychologist specializing in combat trauma, worked with Marcus to address these issues. "What you experienced was beyond the normal range of human endurance," Dr. Santos explained during one of their sessions. "It's completely natural to have psychological reactions to such an extreme survival situation. The key is processing these experiences in a healthy way." Commander Patterson and his SEAL team maintained contact with Marcus throughout his recovery. They had formed a bond during those critical hours of rescue that transcended normal military relationships. Patterson later explained that finding Marcus alive had been one of the most meaningful moments of his 20-year military career. "We've conducted hundreds of missions," Patterson told reporters who later covered the story. "But finding that Marine alive after 6 days buried under rubble reminded us why we do what we do. It wasn't just about rescuing one person. It was about honoring the promise we make to each other that no one gets left behind." Marcus's family arrived at Bagram within a week of his rescue. His mother, Isabella Rodriguez, had been living in agony since being notified that her son was missing in action. When she first saw Marcus in the hospital bed, she couldn't speak for several minutes, simply holding his hand and crying tears of relief and joy. His younger sister, Maria, now a college sophomore, had been organizing prayer vigils and support groups for military families during Marcus's disappearance. She later said that seeing her brother alive was like witnessing a miracle. "Marcus always told us he was indestructible when we worried about him during deployments," she said. "I guess he wasn't exaggerating." The physical recovery required months of intensive rehabilitation. Marcus's leg injuries were severe enough that doctors initially questioned whether he would ever walk normally again, let alone continue his military career. But Marcus approached physical therapy with the same determination that had kept him alive under the rubble. Physical therapist Captain James Mitchell worked with Marcus for 6 hours daily, slowly rebuilding strength and mobility in his damaged legs. "I've never seen anyone approach rehabilitation with such intensity," Captain Mitchell observed. "Marcus treated every therapy session like it was a combat mission. Failure simply wasn't an option in his mind." After 3 months of intensive therapy, Marcus was walking without assistance. After 6 months, he was running again. By the end of his first year of recovery, he had not only returned to full physical fitness, but had actually improved his performance scores compared to before his injury. The military recognition for Marcus's actions came in the form of the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the United States military. The ceremony took place at Marine Corps Base Quantico, with Marcus's family, his rescued squad members, and the SEAL team that found him all in attendance. During the award ceremony, the citation read, "For extraordinary heroism while serving as squad leader with Company B, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, during combat operations against enemy forces in Kunar Province, Afghanistan." When his unit came under intense enemy fire during an ambush, Sergeant Rodriguez voluntarily left his protected position and single-handedly assaulted multiple enemy positions, allowing trapped Marines to extract their wounded and reach safety. His selfless actions and extraordinary courage under fire saved the lives of numerous fellow Marines and exemplified the finest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. But for Marcus, the most meaningful recognition came from his fellow Marines. His squad had commissioned a special plaque that they presented to him after the official ceremony. It read, "To Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, who kept his promise that we would all go home together. Semper Fi." Following his recovery, Marcus faced a decision about his military future. The Marine Corps offered him several options, including a transfer to a training role or a position with recruiting command. However, Marcus requested to return to combat duty, specifically asking to be assigned to Marine Special Operations Command. His request was initially met with skepticism from medical personnel and senior leadership. Marcus had already served 3 combat tours and survived an ordeal that would have ended most military careers. Why risk returning to the most dangerous assignments in the Marine Corps? Marcus's answer was simple. "This is what I was born to do. My experience under that rubble didn't break me. It showed me what I'm really capable of. I can use what I learned to help train other Marines to survive in impossible situations." The Marine Corps eventually approved his request, and Marcus became an instructor at the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center. His curriculum focused on survival psychology, combat leadership under extreme stress, and what he called refusing to quit when quitting makes sense. Marcus's classes became legendary among Marines preparing for deployment. He would begin each session by sharing his story, not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson in the power of mental preparation and commitment to fellow Marines. "The enemy can take away your weapons, your communication, your mobility, even your hope," he would tell his students. "But they can't take away your decision to keep fighting for the Marines beside you." The relationship between Marcus and the SEAL team that rescued him evolved into something unique in military history. Commander Patterson and his team became regular guests at Marcus's training sessions, sharing their perspectives on the rescue operation and the importance of never giving up on missing personnel. Chief Morrison, the explosives expert who had led the technical aspects of the rescue, developed a close friendship with Marcus. They discovered they shared similar backgrounds from small Texas towns, and both had fathers who were Vietnam veterans. Morrison later transferred to a training role himself, partially inspired by Marcus's example of using survival experience to help other service members. Marcus's story gained national attention when military journalist Michael Reynolds wrote a detailed account of the rescue operation. The article, titled "6 Days Under Hell: How Navy SEALs Found the Indestructible Marine," appeared in several national magazines and eventually led to a book deal. However, Marcus insisted that any proceeds from his story be donated to organizations supporting wounded veterans and families of fallen service members. "This story isn't about me," he explained. "It's about what happens when people refuse to give up on each other. Every military family deserves that same level of commitment." Marcus continued serving in the Marine Corps for another 6 years after his rescue, eventually retiring as a master sergeant in 2018. During those years, he trained over 3,000 Marines in survival techniques and combat leadership. His methods, developed through his own extreme experience, became part of official Marine Corps doctrine. After retirement, Marcus established the Rodriguez Foundation, which provides support and training for military families dealing with missing or captured service members. The foundation's motto, "No One Left Behind," reflects the lesson Marcus learned during his 6 days under the rubble, that the bond between service members is stronger than any physical barrier. Today, Marcus lives in Colorado Springs, where he works with veterans transitioning to civilian life. He still maintains contact with every member of his original squad and regularly communicates with the SEAL team that rescued him. The annual reunion of these 16 men has become a tradition, celebrating not just survival, but the unbreakable bonds forged in combat. Marcus married Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a veteran affairs counselor he met during a foundation event. They have 2 children, and Marcus often tells them bedtime stories about the importance of never giving up, of fighting for the people you love, and of keeping promises even when it seems impossible. When people ask Marcus about his time trapped under the rubble, he always emphasizes the same point. "I didn't survive because I was special or indestructible. I survived because I had people counting on me to come home. Sometimes that's enough to keep you going when nothing else will." The collapsed building in Afghanistan where Marcus was buried has since been cleared and rebuilt as a school for local children. The village of Debala now has a small memorial garden where a simple plaque, written in both English and Pashto, commemorates the power of human resilience and the importance of never abandoning hope. Marcus's legacy extends beyond his individual story of survival. His experience became a case study in military psychology programs, teaching future leaders about the mental factors that enable extraordinary endurance. Medical researchers have studied his case to better understand the physiological and psychological mechanisms that allow humans to survive extreme situations. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus's story continues to inspire service members facing their own impossible situations. In forward operating bases around the world, Marines still tell the story of Sergeant Rodriguez, who was buried under dust and blood but refused to die, who kept fighting not for himself but for his brothers in arms, and who proved that sometimes the human spirit really is indestructible. The dust has settled, the blood has healed, and the indestructible hero has found his peace. But the legend of Marcus Rodriguez and the SEALs who refuse to give up on him continues to remind us all that in our darkest moments, when hope seems lost and survival impossible, we are capable of far more than we ever imagined. Sometimes we just need someone who believes in us enough to keep digging, no matter how deep we've been buried. Marcus Rodriguez's story proves that heroes aren't born indestructible. They become indestructible through their refusal to break, their commitment to others, and their absolute determination to keep the promises that matter most. And sometimes, when the dust settles and the blood is washed away, we discover that the most powerful force in the world isn't weapons or explosives or military might. It's the simple, unbreakable human decision to never give up on each other.